saw over 10 million layoffs, and the Federal Reserve projects a loss of nearly 50 million jobs and a depression type unemployment rate of over 32% as we go forward. Up to 35 million people will be losing their employer based health care. So, without a nationwide suspension of rent and mortgage payments, working families will be forced to choose between paying for food and healthcare and for their children versus paying their corporate landlords or big banks. Federal stimulus checks are coming, but they will be short lived and millions will not get them. And so Leticia Sanchez is not alone. Already, the loss of paychecks has meant a third of renters nationwide did not pay their April rent because they simply cannot. Under the pressure of our grassroots demands, the political establishment in many states have passed temporary eviction and foreclosure moratoriums, to make sure that working class homeowners are also protected. Some cities like Seattle are also mandating limited payment plans for after the moratorium is lifted, again, as a result of pressure from our movements. This was not something that was offered out of the kindness of the establishment. But after that moratorium is lifted, the rent will still be due. It's still going to be due. Tens of millions of workers will still be jobless and will not be able to pay that current month's rent, let alone pay back rent, even with a payment plan of a few months. Millions of renters and housing activists have therefore recognized that what we really need and urgently need is a suspension without debt, evictions, or foreclosures of rent, mortgage, and utility payments. We also need a rent freeze, that is no rent increases in 2020. But to win this, we will need a fighting movement, and a May 1st rent strike will help to build momentum for that movement. Because the political establishment has deep, deep ties to the big banks and corporate real estate, and they are not going to give us this rent and mortgage suspension out of some kindness of heart that does not exist. And this is true not only of the Republican Party, but also the Democratic establishment. And that is why we have to fight for this. And the reason this is going to be, we have to be sober, it's going to be hard to win, because winning a rent suspension without consequences is equivalent to getting a bailout for the renters and the working class homeowners and middle class homeowners and small landlords, and it will put the cost of the crisis, as it should be, if there was any justice in this world, on corporate landlords and banks. And if we keep paying rent at the cost of our food and healthcare and our families' needs, then that's a bailout for the corporate landlords who, in the best of times, are exploiting us. And so this is a necessary thing that we have to do, but it's also not going to be easy. It's an economic reality. We have to turn it into a political demand and an organizing opportunity. And so I would really urge everybody to look at our May 1st rent strike FAQ. My staff will be sharing the link on the live stream feed. Make sure you look at it, not just right now, but also offline. It is, I hope, a really useful resource for those of you who are seriously trying to organize. Or if your starting point is simply, well, I'm curious, this seems intriguing, this seems useful, what does it say? So I urge you to share this fact with everybody who, in your family, friends, and coworker circle who's also struggling like you. And be sure to join us at our next event, which is going to be on Wednesday, April 22nd at 10 a.m. Pacific time, because that struggle, the tax Amazon struggle that we will be talking about there, is going to be linked to renter struggles as well. And as we go through this evening's event, I'll mention more about it. But as we start with our first speaker, make sure that you send your comments and questions on the live stream feed. My staff will be looking at the live stream feed and making sure that those questions or comments are being relayed to us, and so that we can share this as part of this evening's proceedings and ask questions to our panelists. So today, we are really honored to have Sami Bourma with us. Sami Bourma is from Niger, but lived most of his life before coming to the US in Saudi Arabia. He has worked for 19 years as a cook in one of the cafeterias at the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, where he's a shop steward. He's a top leader in his union, Unite Here Local 23. He lives with his wife and 2 young children in the Southern Towers apartment complex in Alexandria, Virginia. So, this is important because the reason Sami is here is because he's organizing his fellow tenants. And in fact, their struggle was reported in the news. And I know we have a slide that will show you, what that looked like. And he's going to be talking about his struggle. Sami has worked as a second job as an Uber driver in order to support himself in the DC metro region's high cost of living. Just like Seattle, on both the coasts, we have this problem, as well as supporting his family back home and a lengthy immigration process for his wife and daughter to come here. So these are the struggles of real people in our society, and these are the people who go to work and make the profits for the bosses. And Sami, like many of us, is currently unemployed and is spending all his time organizing in his apartment building. And this is a very important thing for us to hear from tenants who are organizing on the ground. So welcome, Sami, and take it away.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Sami Borma. I'm from Niger. Also, I just say I spent all my life, my livelihood in Saudi Arabia, supporting my family after my father. And in 1999, I arrived to the United States, and I started building myself from zero. I started working the first, in a small restaurant and New York Avenue, they call it Marrakesh. And I worked with them for 2 years. At the same time, I work part-time as a security guard. And from there, I take some class, cooking class, and then I start working in NIH 2001, February 2001. So from that moment, I start, building myself after the struggle I have in Saudi Arabia to working with the tough Saudi Arabian leaders and up there. So for going through struggle from Saudi Arabia to come to the United States and have a free time to build myself, and I got a real opportunity at NIH, working up there. And by 2004, I'll be able to afford myself, buying a little townhouse in Baltimore. So I was so happy. I started reaching my dream, and building out myself, trying to figure some way how to bring my family to United States. So during this time, and that's what economy crashed during 2008. And by 2009, I lost my house. But I still, at that moment, I didn't give up. I said, hey, this is one opportunity. I tried to build myself and I failed, but I'm not giving up. And I continue building myself. Um, so I continue working at NIH, and I found another part-time job as a security guard with this company, Securitas. I continue building myself, supporting my family, and at the same time, and NIH, I enjoy Local 23 as a shop store. So from there, I start learning, how to take in structure, how to build, if you want to do something, you have to have some instruction for you to be able to succeed. So through Local 23, I really learned a lot, side of a working place, and how to move my coworkers, to win. If it's a contract, if it's grievance. So I take that experience, I transfer it to myself. I say, hey, I can do something better than that. So from security job, I changed to Uber driver, which is I can see more income to as Uber driver. So from 5 o'clock in the morning, I leave my house. I finish NIH at 2:30, and 3 o'clock I jump behind the wheel until 11 o'clock. And then at that time, by 2010, I got married with my wife, and God bless us with a young, beautiful girl. Job I changed. So, and I started going processing for immigration situation. So that, it took me 10 years for me to be able to get my wife here, from one application to another, from one lawyer to another. So it was a big struggle and a big pocket hit, but I still get up. I didn't give up. I was trying to figure somewhere how, because I know there is something, down the road I'd be able to do to get my family down here. So I continue doing it until my family get here. So as for my family get here, it's 2 years. I just trying, I just start building myself again with my family, and then God blessed me with another boy. So that struggle I get through during that about like I would say the 16 years or 15 years, and then that it put me in a really good experience time, things to be able to recognize if there's anything you need, if you put in a structure, you sit down and figure it out, you'll be able to achieve it. So when that crisis coming through, while we were organizing Dallas Airport with my teammate from Local 23, uh, we organizing HML host, to get a contract, and then that coronavirus situation coming through. So we already, me and my family, we going struggling, paying. It's not only rent. The little loan I get to bring them here is all because of ticket money, and plus my car loan, plus the little credit card I have. So already I was in a hardship, and then we come in through this, and everything's clapped all on one time. At the same time, I cannot drive, Uber because of coronavirus. Because when I look at my kids, I look at my family, I cannot afford to get outside there to get affected by this corona, and then I come home, and then all my family be, in trouble. So I get laid off from both jobs at the same time, at the same day, because when I get laid off from NIH, and at the same time I'm organizing with Local 23, but I still continue organizing long. I tell myself if I be able to do anything from home, it's not only because I know there's a whole lot of people out there struggling the same me. So that's what is the moment came. I start thinking ahead of a situation. So I was thinking to myself first before I start looking to anybody outside. I was like, okay, now I'm at home, looking at my account, looking at the rent is coming, look at my car loan is coming. So what is I supposed to do in that? Because if I take, that money to make any one of those payments, so in a 15 days, I'm not be able to put the food on the top of my kids' table. So, and then I started thinking it ahead again. I was like, okay, let me talk to my friends. Who is closest to me? We share problems, the good things, everything. We should all come together. So, at that time, that my clock started ticking. It started, from my friends from Local 23, because we have, a lot of Local 23 members in the Southern Tower. So I started calling them. I said, hey, how do you still working? They say, no, I've been let off. You've been let off? They say, yeah, I'm let off. And I let off in a bad way because number one, I don't have any. So that is particular person I talked to, he's a good friend of mine. I asked him, hey, what do you mean you are being laid off in a bad time? He said, number one, I don't have anything in my account. First, I was thinking about to go borrow some money to pay my rent, and then now I'm laid off, and it's only the things I do is kind of a Uber. And his same my situation. He had the two kids, and at that moment, I believe his wife she's pregnant. So it makes me feel kind of a little, feel a little bit better for myself because I have a little bit something. So I cut from my own pocket to help him to put the food in his family table. So we start talking, me and him. So and I start reaching, my co-workers, leaders in the Southern Tower. Everything what I had, I've been let off. I've been let off. I've been let off. So,
Hey, Sammy. Sorry,
yes,
sorry, don't mean to interrupt you, but I was just hoping you could come to the tenant struggle right now because we we have people for about an hour and a half, so we want to get to the meat of the discussion, and we want other speakers to join in as well.
sure. So, during that first day, calling each other. We have kind of about 10 people. We have the same situation. So we started putting our structure to all our leader in local 23. So we put assignment everybody to call at least 4 people to see their situation and how we can help. All right. So we come up with everybody in the struggle. So only the things will be able to survive to go to the tenant, the landlord to see what kind of action we have. So we started going and there's no response. The door is closed. They don't want to talk. They talk behind the glass. If you have anything, go send us an email. And then they send us an email reminding us we're not accepting no money order, no check, paper check. Only you gotta go open an account. So the things are getting worse. So is the struggle becoming bigger? There's a lot of us we don't know how to use the computer now. That we don't have that enough experience for the computer. So to make the story short for that struggle, and we start thinking of it. We pay the rent, okay. Or if we have any deal, how about after this crisis? What we're gonna end with? We make the calculation. We come up with if I'm paying $2,000 a month, if I have to take a date because of a coronavirus. After this coronavirus, if you take it 12 months, how much debt I'm gonna have to get on my table? So they becoming is something really we have to stand up. We fight, back to the lieutenant. So in a short time, we'll come with 100 people. That 100 people, we decide to have a demand safety and a rent relief. Uh, so we put that demand, and people start sign in short time. We have almost about 10 days or 11 days. We have over 300 people signed for that petition. So we start reaching the people in power to see how they can support us for our demand to spray all around Virginia or around all United States, because it's not only us we are facing that struggle. There's a lot of people out there facing that struggle. So that's one of the things so far we're doing. We demand to cancel the rent and to have of the any circumstances after coronavirus after the coronavirus.
Thank you, Sami. And it's really important to have a live struggle that is, really succeeding in organizing renters, because I think that's going to be the heart and soul of the organizing we do. And we want to bring in more into that into the discussion of actually the nitty gritty of organizing, not just why we should organize, which is absolutely the fundamental starting point. But once we are convinced that we need to do this, how do we actually concretely go forward? And to share the sort of the part two of this story from Alexandria, Virginia, that Sami started, we have Sarah Jacobson, who was born in New Mexico but now lives in Washington, D.C. And she has been part of the Unite Here Union for 16 years, organizing mostly in the South and Southwest. And before the start of the pandemic, she was working on a new organizing drive of airport concessions workers at Dulles Airport. And she's going to share more about how the union provided its knowledge base and its organizing support to this tenant struggle that Sami was just describing. And actually, just to share with you all, I mean, as a rank and file member of the teachers union myself, I think it is a powerful example of how unions, because they have the organizing and the political know-how to help or concrete struggles, what an important role and decisive role they can play in helping renters. But this hasn't happened enough. In fact, the Unite Here Local 23 example we're seeing here is an exception to the rule. So it's so critical to have Sarah's voice here. So I welcome Sarah to share her thoughts on how this struggle was organized and what role the union played, and also what are the day-to-day actions organizers should be taking to organize tenants.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm very honored to be here tonight and to follow in the footsteps of my brother, Sami, who is the inspiration for the rent strike organizing that we are supporting in Virginia and now also in the District of Columbia and Maryland. I think, Sami's story illustrates, one of the really important ways that this rent strike movement has grown, and that is by actually sharing the truth of what people are going through and the reason that they're choosing to make a decision that feels like a risk, but balanced against a greater risk of going into debt or sacrificing things that their families need right now. So the buildings where Sammy lives, they're called Southern Towers. They're operated by a corporation named Bell Partners. It's a place where I'd actually spent months of my life, I think, because so many of the people who live in these buildings are airport workers, food service workers, other workers who have chosen to organize and form the union in the time that I've been living in Washington, D.C. And so these are large apartments. There are more than 2,000 units in these 5 buildings. And so when Sammy came to us and said, I'm taking my money out of my bank account, this company is not going to get my money during this crisis. We immediately looked to the list of other union members who we knew who lived in these buildings. And so as Sammy was starting his outreach that he described with his, friends, people that he goes to mosque with, or the family friends, other families whose children go to school together with his daughter. We also started outreach to union members or airport workers who had been part of organizing drives in their own workplaces. 98% of our union's members are laid off right now, are unemployed. So we knew that our entire membership was experiencing the same crisis that Sammy is describing. And so the early list building, we also helped to work with Sammy and the other, his neighbors in Southern Towers to create the demands. And so we shared those and gave those to the neighbor group as a Google form that people could fill out themselves. It includes a name, phone number. It asks if people agree to receive text messages so that we're setting up a communication infrastructure. It asks whether people need assistance applying for unemployment. That's some of the infrastructure that our union has built in order to support our members during this time. And we wanted to offer that as well to people who are not in our union, but who are organizing and facing the same challenges together. And then it asks if people want to get involved, and overwhelmingly, people have responded that they wanted to get involved. So what we've tried a lot of things, and so I'm going to talk about the things that we've learned that worked from many of our experiments. So we had a very, very high hopes for this Google form going out into the world and people signing up, just getting it in through a Viber chat group or over Facebook from a text message from a friend, and joining, and then the movement inside the Southern Towers would grow very quickly. And what we learned is that it actually takes one-on-one organizing. And because in the Southern Towers building, the landlords actually want their money so desperately, they have started a very aggressive campaign where they have been not just emailing people about, we want your money and this is how we're going to get your money, but they've also started door knocking tenants, where managers of the building are knocking on people's doors and explaining the new fee structures that rent they had agreed to postpone when the fee would be applied this month, in the month of April. But they they're really trying to scare people around the new date, which is April 20th. They've been doing phone calls to people who they were not able to find at the doors. And so if we had just had a one-on-one conversation one single time, we would not have a way to efficiently, for there to be a communication network in place to go back for people when they're getting confused or feel scared or intimidated by the landlord to have someone who they trust who's talking to them and guiding them what to do. And Sammy and some of the other leaders have very inspiring stories about how people did get scared, how they did pay the rent even, and then spoke to their leader, the person who had brought them into their group. And very remarkably, 2 women actually figured out a way to get their checks back before the landlord got a hold of them. And so, I think we have also it started as a daily Zoom call that was open to everyone who had signed and who was in the text list. So we were, people were reaching out through their groups and then getting information about how to come together. And so that's also been a very important part of the building this organization, is that people can see it's not just me and the one person that I'm talking to, but there's actually a broader group, a much larger group of people who are participating. And we share the numbers about how the petition is growing in all of those calls, and then talk about what are the next action steps. And so that was, in part, those conversations were how there were outreach phone calls to city council. We invited city council into those Zoom calls to hear from tenants and neighbors about the safety issues that people were facing. People mobilized to turn out on a Zoom that you couldn't be a part of, but to the city council meeting. And then, today, in today's Zoom call, people have decided to do an action on April 20th, a way of signaling that, in fact, they're standing up and organizing and continuing to get stronger, despite the sort of fear around this date that many of the tenants have, that many people in the building have. And so, very, very exciting. People are going to do a car rally in the parking lot, driving around the buildings. And there's some other organizations who are DSA in Northern Virginia who are excited to support this organizing effort by the tenants, and who have agreed to to come and also join and be a part of that public action. So we are there. I said there are 2,000 units in the building. We have, we feel powerful and not powerful at the same time. There are 300 people who have signed on to the rent petition. So we feel powerful that we're 300. We're not close to majority in these buildings. And so we're really, through one-on-one organizing, but also by trying to find ways to build momentum, to use, small victories, both symbolic and real victories that people are getting by organizing, to encourage and to reach out to more people who are outside our structure, where it's very challenging to grow the structure in a time of social distancing. And so really excited to listen to the other presenters and also answer questions together with Sammy when we get to that part of tonight's presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. And our next speaker is Sasha Sommer. So while she's getting ready and I introduce her, I just wanted to take into account some of the questions and comments that have come up in the live stream feed. And I think some of the questions are directly related to what Sarah was just talking about. That is the the day-to-day and the real discipline that you need to organize your fellow tenants, and what that actually takes. And so one of the questions that has come up in the feed is any example documents that we could create to hand to our fellow tenants. And another question was how can myself and other people I organize with in Philadelphia and across the country help out with this fight? Well, I think the best way we can all help each other out is to take on the task. It's a difficult task, as Sarah described. Sammy and others are putting all their time into this, and yet it is not easy because for the simple reason that it is legitimately scary for renters to start building their power. Even though there's latent power, it is scary because you're going up against powerful adversaries, and we should never make the mistake of underestimating either the power and the clout or the viciousness of corporate landlords and property management corporations and corporate real estate and the big banks. I mean, they are absolutely blood-sucking entities, especially among the capitalist class. And so we have to go into this soberly, but also with real excitement and adrenaline coursing through our veins, because we're doing what is just and what is right. And this is absolutely something to be proud of. But concretely, what do we do? So, in relation to the questions that I just read out, if you can all go to the FAQ, which again, I'm sure my staff will share out the link to. And if you go to the points that are on pages 3 and 4, they concretely go into how you can get organized from one day to the next. So actually starting with making a list of your fellow tenants. And as Sarah said, your aim should be to get commitments, preferably from a super majority, but at least a majority. So at least 50, and better yet, 75% of the tenants, you on around clearly formulated demands. So what is it that you're demanding? Are you demanding a rent suspension of 100% rent suspension? Are you demanding 80% rent suspension? You should decide what you feel that the tenants in your community are willing to support. Use phone contacts and have one-on-one conversations, as Sarah said, and make sure you talk concretely about the demands. Make sure that everybody who's signed up gets a phone call within the next 24 hours to welcome them. Use a group text system to drive daily content, so people are in touch with one another and don't lose hope, don't get demoralized, don't get out of touch. Do a weekly Zoom call, and also figure out who your tenants are. Figure out whether it's you need to reach out to other people in the community as well, and I'll talk more about this as well. But also, if you're in Seattle, definitely sign up to join the Seattle Rent Strike 2020 Facebook group. My staff will send you the Facebook link, because we really need to stay in touch together, and we need to hear your stories of organizing. How are you concretely doing it? Because we will learn lessons from that as well. There was another question that came up, which was, how are landlords going to collect their back rent if rents are suspended? Well, there's a simple answer to this. We are, calling for a statewide suspension, and there's a nationwide demand as well, and many organizations are part of this. We're calling for a rent, mortgage, and utility suspension. In other words, if there are small landlords who will not be able to make their mortgage payments because their tenants have lost their jobs or income and they're not able to pay, then those small landlords should join our struggle as well, because we're calling for small landlords and for homeowners to be protected and for the cost to be paid by corporate landlords. And if your landlord is a corporate landlord or a property management corporation, then absolutely it is the correct thing to do to fight for rent suspension, and they should pay the cost because they have massive cash reserves. They have all the wealth that they have made by exploiting renters through sky-high rent. So we should not in any way feel guilty about making sure that corporations pay for this crisis, not working people. That is absolutely the right thing to do. And the FAQ explains the political points as well. But I wanted to introduce Sasha now. Sasha Somer is a dedicated community activist and socialist in Seattle, and she's been a community organizer in my council office for several years. She was part of the fight for $15 minimum wage in Seattle. As you know, Seattle was the first major city to win that. And then also in our re-election campaign last year. And she's also right now fighting to tax Amazon and other big businesses in Seattle. She was also the lead organizer in a tenant struggle very recently. And she's going to be talking about that. It's a concrete example of how tenants can get organized and can win against their corporate landlords. So take it away, Sasha.
All right. Hi, everyone. It was really great to hear from Sammy and Sarah about the work that they did. It was really inspiring. If we get organized and we fight back, we have the chance to win things that previously seemed impossible. Last year, we found out that a corporate landlord was planning on tearing down the Chateau Apartments in Seattle, a building in the Central District with 21 low-income and affordable apartments, with tenants who had been living there for 30 to 40 years, many of them people of color, immigrants, seniors, and families with young children. Many of them would be forced to move out of the city limits, away from the neighborhood that they had been a part of for decades, away from the community that speaks their language, or back out onto the streets. And tenants all across this city are facing this exact situation, but normally they get very little heads up about being pushed out of their homes and no help from their landlord. But in this case, we helped the tenants get organized around a set of demands and won $5,000 for each tenant for relocation assistance on top of the legally required $3,900, extended the length of time that they could stay in their homes by 2 years, forced the landlord to fix over 90 housing code violations, and got all of the low-income tenants access to another low-income building in their neighborhood that they can move into. Of course, the exact demands in that situation and today are different, but the methods of organizing that we use will be the same today. So yeah, we'll be in the strongest position if we're able to get not just the majority of renters generally in our city to participate, but if entire apartment buildings collectively participate in the rent strike. And as Sarah was talking about, the first step is really just having those one-on-one conversations with your neighbors, finding out what they're going through. Are they concerned that they won't be able to pay their rent in May? What do they think about the demands of the suspension of rent and mortgage payments and a rent freeze to prevent any rent increases? And what do they think about a rent strike? Really just get a sense of where people are at and make the case for our demands. These conversations are also an important opportunity for political education so that all the tenants can get on the same page about our tactics, targets, and demands. We want everyone to be clear about who our target is. Our petition, for instance, is calling on Governor Inslee to enact the statewide suspension of rent, mortgage, and utility, and a rent freeze. We can also make demands, the way that Sammy and Sarah are on our landlord specifically, demand that the landlord not charge rent for a set amount of time, etc. And we also want to be clear about where our strength comes from. Our strength comes from our collective action, from our collective action, from our ability to directly threaten their profits and to publicly call out the politicians that are siding with the landlords. Governor Inslee and the landlords, they know the situation. They know that we are suffering. So it's not, our strength does not come from just sort of like making sure they know that situation. They are putting the profits of the landlords above our needs. And so we need to change that situation. In these conversations with your neighbors, you're not going to convince everyone, but we do need a majority involved. Solidarity is the bedrock of any renters or workers movement. Our strength is in our unity and collective action. If we're alone, we can be singled out. So take time to patiently discuss with people who aren't convinced, but of course, don't waste your time if it's clear you're not going to change their mind. And I think another thing that's important in these conversations is to find other tenant organizers in your building. People who are really on board with the demands and the tactics, who are ready to go out and talk to other people in your building, who can share the work with you and build up relationships with other tenants. If everything just relies on you or just one person, what happens if you have to leave or even get sick? You need to broaden the layer of leaders and organizers beyond yourself. And in these conversations, you can also find people with compelling stories that can really make the case about why these demands are so important. People who are willing to speak publicly about their story. So make sure to get everyone's name and phone number and email, so you can follow up with them, as well as their apartment number, and to take notes after each conversations about what questions they had or concerns and how the conversation went generally. You would be surprised about how hard it is to remember, all the details of each conversation once you've talked to 10 or 15 different tenants. So take good notes. And of course, all of this is more challenging with the need for social distancing, but there's a number of ways we can overcome that obstacle. You could post a letter on a bulletin board if that exists in your building with a space for people to give you their contact information to follow up with them and have these individual conversations over the phone. Could leave a note at everyone's door, making the case for the rent strike and asking them to call and email you to get in touch about it. You can also, wear a mask, carry disinfectant with you, knock on doors, and then, step back from the door to have the conversation from a respectful and safe distance. Um, so, once you've gotten a sense of where your neighbors are at, and you've gotten some folks on board, you want to develop an action step and get an overwhelming majority to sign on to it. You want to have tenants meetings. You have a space for people to talk collectively. Of course, doing that over Zoom or other video conferencing services. And you want to come to the meeting with a proposed action step. Although, of course, be flexible, but it's good to have something to start with. For instance, you could draft a letter clearly stating your demands and that you will all be participating in the rent strike, and gather as many signatures of tenants as possible on it. Landlords will try to say, oh, this is just a few radical tenants that are taking part of the rent strike. So we need to show publicly that we have the majority on our side and that we're united. It's crucial that we get as many tenants as possible signed on to a collective statement, a collective action. So at the Chateau Apartments, I spent many entire days door knocking. I'd get there at 9 in the morning and catch some tenants on their way before they went out to work, and 2 p.m. to talk to seniors, and then I was there at 6 p.m. or later for tenants who worked late. And I went back multiple times, noting down who did or did not answer the door. And it took multiple conversations with people to convince them sometimes. If someone isn't convinced at first, you don't want to just cut them out. You want to keep reaching out and being friendly, keep them updated about the conversations other tenants are having. Of course, that's a lot of time, which is why and you might, still be working or whatever. So it's still, that's why it's so important to get more tenant organizers involved to share out that work. Then, of course, you're going to want to publicize what we're doing. We want everyone to know, the landlords to know, the media to know, the tenants around the city to know that you're taking this collective action and gathering public support. We want to put our struggle and your corporate landlord in the public spotlight. And that's going to be what builds community solidarity for your tenant group, and also put pressure on the landlord. So, sharing widely your action on social media, organizing Zoom meetings. You could do banner drops outside of your windows, phone banking friends and neighbors, postering the neighborhood, asking for support from community groups that you're members of, unions or faith communities, or whatever group you're a member of. Ask them to send a letter in of support and try to publicize that as much as possible. That's all, increasing the public spotlight on that landlord. And then, we're going to want to expect that the corporate landlords will oppose us, either covertly or they'll be openly vicious. And, they have millions of dollars on the line here. When we were organizing with the tenants at the Chateau Apartments, that was only 21 units, but the landlord fought back fiercely for months because they knew that if they gave in here, it wouldn't just help these tenants, but that it could inspire other tenants to fight back too. And that's going to be the same in this fight, but on an even larger scale. They will shamelessly try to divide and conquer. At the Chateau Apartments, they offered one tenant, a family with 3 young children who had just gotten out of homelessness, an amazing deal. They didn't say exactly what it was, but they said, we'll only offer it to you if you meet with us one-on-one. Basically, like, if you break from organizing with the rest of the tenants and break away from Councilmember Sawant's office. And they knew if they could break this tenant away from the group, it would likely confuse and demoralize the rest of the tenants and undermine the struggle. And the landlords could then, tell the press, look at how great we're treating this tenant. They could try to portray themselves as the good guys and the rest of the tenants as being unreasonable. This tactic shows that they know that our strength is in our unity, and that's why they try so hard to break it. An important part of working class organizing is successfully pushing back against divide and conquer. This is an age-old strategy used by the capitalist class to break workplace and union struggles. And this tenant and their family, they stood against that, and they said, no, we're not going to meet with you by ourselves. Our family has just gotten a whole lot bigger, referencing all the other tenants in the building. They will also try to threaten and intimidate, as Sarah was talking about. At the Chateau Apartments, after we started to get organized, they sent an eviction notice to tenants who were working class seniors and immigrants who don't speak English, who'd been living there for 30 years. They sent this eviction notice because they were 1 day late on rent. They were not evicted. We stopped it with the help of the Housing Justice Project, a group of lawyers volunteering their time to help tenants. But it really shows the lengths that landlords will go to defend their profits. Again, our strength against this is in our unity. An injury to one is an injury to all. If landlords try to single out one tenant for intimidation, we must call it out publicly and stand united. At the Chateau Apartments, there's 30 or so tenants, low-income families, seniors, immigrants, people of color. They were able to fight back against a corporation worth $187 million and win using these tactics. It took a serious fight that spanned many months, a whole series of tenants meetings to get on the same page, days of door knocking to get everyone signed on to the demand letter, public meetings and press conferences to get the word out and build public support, confronting the landlords at their offices, and above all, staying united in the face of attacks from the corporate media and retaliation from the landlord. To be clear, as challenging as the fight at the Chateau Apartments was, our struggle now to win rent suspension, meaning just canceling of rent payments without consequences, will be far harder. But we can potentially win if we get organized seriously. And certainly, if we don't get organized, and many of us face months of joblessness, then it's guaranteed that we will face a massive wave of evictions. If we want to reject that outrageous injustice, then we have to get organized and fight. Already, a third of renters across the country didn't pay rent in April, but individuals not paying rent will not build power against the landlords. We need to turn these individual actions that are based on necessity into a political tool to win our demands. But it will take a huge fight, so let's get out there and get organized. Thanks.
That was really inspiring, Sasha, and it really went into a lot of the details that I think tenants, our fellow tenants, who everybody's watching, who will watch the recording later, need to know about. And I think it was really important that Sasha, Sarah, and Sami both went into how tenant organizing, it's not easy, it is painstaking work, but it is worth it. And plus, we don't have a choice. As Sasha said, we're going to face massive evictions and foreclosures if we don't fight, because it's not as if the corporate landlords are saying, oh, you cannot pay, but we're all in this together, but since you cannot pay and we have millions of dollars in cash reserves, no problem, you need a bailout. No, that's not what they're saying. They will gouge us for every penny we have and all the pennies we don't have. And so as I said before, we have to unapologetically get organized and fight for ourselves and for our fellow working class people and others who are exploited in this capitalist society. But I think all of this also links to becoming clear about what does all of the struggle look like. And before I introduce our next speaker, Rob Rook, I wanted to take a couple of those questions on that theme. One of you has asked in this feed, my landlord is a single family who live in the house next door who are not a corporate landlord. Do I still strike? And then another question that says, do I strike if my landlord is a small single family? I think these are very important questions because I know there are many of us who don't have, I don't think this is the majority. I think the majority of renters are, unfortunately, this is the truth about capitalism and for-profit market, that a majority of the housing is in the hands of for-profit entities, the big rapacious corporate landlords and the property management corporations who are deeply exploiting renters. But some of us do have decent people, other people who are formerly working people. Maybe they bought one small rental unit to earn retirement income. There are some cases like that. So in those cases, it's a good question to ask, do you still strike or not? I think we should be clear. The goal of this May 1st rent strike action and our demand for rent suspension is to ensure that renters and working families are protected and that big banks and corporate landlords pay for the crisis because they can. They can afford to. They're not going to want to. As Sasha said, they're going to fight tooth and nail, but they can pay it. We can't, so they should pay it. But the goal of this movement is not to be vindictive in any way or to be divided from truly small landlords who are not gouging their tenants. The goal is not to be divided from working class and middle class homeowners. That's why we're calling for a rent and mortgage suspension both. So if you are a tenant of a very small landlord, a small single family, as these example questions have shown, then I would really urge you to talk to the landlord, try to arrive at an understanding. Possibly, if these landlords are not exploiting their tenants, in any case, they would want to arrive at an understanding, because for them it is about that personal relationship with the tenant. They want to make sure you have a roof over your head. So if you're able to arrive at that kind of understanding, you should still join us at protest actions. You should still be part of the overall action in solidarity with other renters, even though in your personal situation you may have it resolved, and I hope you can. But if that doesn't resolve, and if you don't find a resolution, then I urge you to contact my office. My staff will share my office email address, and then we'll have to see what to do on a given case basis. What's the solution. It's not, we'll have to look at the specific situation. But you should definitely, regardless, be part of the actions. Sarah mentioned that in other cities they're doing April 20th as an organizing day. Here in Seattle, we're very certainly going to be doing the May 1st, not only rent strike but also protest actions. So join us for the Seattle car caravan protest. We will announce the details later, but make sure you are linked in on the Facebook event, so that you just say going, so that you receive updates about that. I wanted to quote another renter who wrote to us in the petition that we circulated. This is from Kristen Campbell. She says, "Me and my boyfriend are both laid off from our jobs. He's unable to collect unemployment and I am on standby only. We are almost 7 months pregnant with our daughter and now don't know if we will have the funds to make sure we have what we need to bring our princess home, let alone make our rent or car or insurance payments. We are doing good just to be able to eat, as emergency food stamps only provide less than $200 per month, and I was spending close to $450 just on food for a month. We need this rent suspension so badly just to make sure we are okay to have our baby and bring her home. I really don't want to worry about having a newborn and making rent, because it would eventually come down to us being homeless, because my child would need more than the two of us do now, and she comes in June." This story brought tears to my eyes, and when I was first reading it, and I was reminded of this story because our next speaker, Rob Rook, is a socialist who has for years brought real compassion to his activism for working people like Kristen and her partner. Rob is a former executive
Karen, the
board
noise,
member
Karen.
of Carpenters Local 713 in California's Bay Area. He has been an organizer with the Campaign for Renters' Rights in Oakland for 10 years. And he's a member of Socialist Alternative in Oakland. And he's also a currently laid off construction worker. So welcome, Rob.
Thank you. I want to thank Sammy and Sarah and Sasha for their inspiring and useful contributions to this discussion. And of course, Shama for organizing the town hall around this really important subject. I want to thank everybody who's out there watching this event, and especially essential workers that are out there, and most especially anyone that's sick. Our solidarity is with you during this moment. Most of the Campaign for Renters' Rights in Oakland, we've organized since about 1999. Most of our cases were and have been single parent families facing evictions, where landlords are trying to get around rent control. But we also had a very big battle with the City of Alameda Housing Authority, where we fought for 200 and alongside and helped self-organize tenants to win 238 families won back their Section 8 housing vouchers in a situation where we were told there's no money for it. So, but we've never been involved in a rent strike before. So that's really a sign of the fact that we're living through a moment that no one really could have imagined even a few weeks ago. We have in America, we currently have a combined healthcare, economic, and social disaster taking place at the same time. At one of the main food banks in Santa Rosa, California, last month they were giving out 250 meals a day. Currently, they're giving out 120,000 meals a day, serving 7,000 people per day with 16 meals and to take back to their families. And that's expected to double in the period ahead. Even before Corona, 44% of American workers make only $18,000 or less in this past economy. This is in the richest. We here in California live in the richest state, in the richest country in the history of the world. And why are people now on the food lines? Because they couldn't afford any savings. Everybody is dramatically in debt, and we live in a society really where inequality is highly organized against us, against working class people. In Socialist Alternative, we find it useful in workplace organizing and in tenant organizing and in electoral campaigns to try to figure out where we're at, where the situation is, in order to figure out how we should organize in relation to it. In April, as was mentioned, about 30% of apartment tenants were unable to make their rent at the beginning of that month. And those tenants basically ran out of money several weeks ago. Their one-time $1,200 federal payment check will not go that far on the West Coast, as we know, and also, by the sound of it, on the East Coast also. The unemployment systems also seem to be totally overwhelmed with the number of people. I have not heard anything back from them other than they accepted me online, and this was several weeks ago. 22 million people have applied for unemployment in the last 1 month. But some people also will be getting their care money, the $600 extra that will be on their way. And I think many landlords are salivating at that, thinking that they are trying to draw up plans, payment plans, which inevitably will lead a lot of tenants to go in even more into debt than they are currently in debt. And that's something we are opposed to anyway. So this is where Rent Strike 2020 comes in. There are already millions that didn't make April's rent payment and are now 1 month behind already in their rent. And there will likely be far more people who will be unable to make the rent in May. The only certainty for the coming months, and I'm not trivializing this, but the only certainty is the increased uncertainty, that we're entering a period of economic precarity on a scale which has been unseen in living memory in this country. And that we have no choice but to self-organize collectively, both for the bigger political goals that Shama has outlined for a rent freeze and rent forgiveness, but also literally building by building, as we heard from our friends on the East Coast. So what do we mean by organizing, self-organizing collectively? We're not suggesting that everyone in every situation withhold their rent. We're suggesting that everyone safely attempt to connect with first their roommates, but then also with their building co-tenants and their neighbors. And while maintaining self-distancing, fly your neighbors. People all over the country are doing this, as we've heard. Organize a Zoom meeting if you can with others from your building, and let them know that they can apply for unemployment benefits and what their rights are, and also that there is a mortgage moratorium, which will give people a little sense of ease at the fear of what's coming up. I just spoke to a tenant last night, a woman who raised the whole thing about the fear of who can she trust and who can't she trust. And this is the same in workplace organizing. Is the first fear of anybody organizing in the workplace, and I've done this as a carpenter, is you're going to get fired. And the first fear is of tenants organizing is that you will be singled out to be evicted. But we have a situation now where people's backs are against the wall, and to try to figure out who they can trust In California, this is how we kind of approach these tenant meetings over Zoom or online or otherwise, is we try and figure out collectively what an average rent everyone can afford, and whether that is a rent reduction of 80% or 10% of those that are present. There'll always also be a family or individual who has absolutely nothing. And our approach has been that we should ask them to make a token rent payment, maybe $10 or $100 or whatever, and that include them as a part of the deal. So what we're trying to do is trying to figure out a way, and we've done this in a number of buildings, to bring people together collectively in a way with making the least sacrifice for those people that are trying to figure out how to be a part of this movement, but are and the main thing, one of the main elements for us is not to leave any tenant behind. When we're agreed collectively, then we have a couple of tenants write the letter, and then they will then send a registered letter to the landlord explaining our situation and our rent reduction offer. And this is not a payment plan. We are opposed to any kind of indebtedness for tenants. If the landlord agrees, great, then we spread the news over either our Facebook rent groups. We have 1,300 on our rent group here in the Bay Area, or to neighbors. If the landlord refuses, then it's easier for us to suggest to the majority of tenants that we strike collectively. This will seem far more reasonable to most of our co-tenants. So we don't want evictions, but an eviction wave is coming in America because we live in a society that puts the dollar before the well-being of families and individuals. A wave of also long-term layoffs are also coming because the economy is not going to pick up. There's large numbers of people in the service industry that are going to be out of work possibly for the rest of the year or longer. But what we have no choice in is to attempt to organize, and that is really what Rent Strike 2020 is about. In the summer, when shelter in place is lifted, if it is lifted, overwhelm the court system with eviction cases. We'll be there to disrupt that process with mass resistance if we're successful in organizing now, with our message that we won't leave our homes. Save your money for food, for healthcare costs, but remember, if you're currently housed, do not move. That's a big case that we're making to everybody. People think if they get an eviction notice, they should leave. Do not leave. So why are socialists involved in this fight? I think most socialists these days are millennials, and they are, unlike myself, and they are already massively in debt, and they don't want to become slaves to their interest payments. But that is life for a lot of Americans these days. Socialists argue that the banks need to be publicly owned and not used to turn people out of their homes, but instead to build affordable city-owned housing. Under capitalism, millions of renters are forced to give their landlord sometimes half of their money, half of their monthly income. This is almost feudal. Imagine going to the grave, having given half of all the work that you work for to somebody who doesn't even really need the money. We want to live in a society and a world where we aren't always anxious about if we're going to be homeless someday. One of the big landlords in America, and I'm going to end with this point, is Mid-American Apartments. They own 100,000 units. They made $1.6 billion in profits off their tenants last year. I haven't figured out the maths yet, but how much it is per tenant. But they made money that really should have been going elsewhere and shouldn't have been impoverishing hardworking working class people. They are also highly organized with an army of lawyers and an army of politicians that they've paid off. But there are more of us than there are of them. And we have history on our side. And I believe if we organize, we can win the future that working class people deserve. And it does start, as the previous speakers have all outlined, with organizing the building blocks at the bottom where working class people are, so that we can build the structures, which I think Sammy talked about initially, that can give us the power that we can use to change this society.
Thank you, Rob. That was a very important contribution to hear, for us to hear from, and also to understand why, that sort of the larger context behind why renters need to organize this fight back, and not just in this pandemic. Our next speaker is Uba Versame Arden, who's going to bring in some more important points. But before that, I wonder if I could ask a question to Sarah. Sarah Jacobson, who spoke earlier. We have a question from somebody who lives here in Seattle. They say, I'm in Seattle District 3. I hate that there aren't really any common spaces in my building to post much. Hundreds of tenants here, though. So while people keep to themselves, I'd love to change that. Sarah and Sami, and maybe we can start with Sarah. Can you tell us how tenants can address these problems when there are not really any physical spaces for them to post and post notices? And on top of that, we are also living in the age of social distancing. So how can tenants overcome these barriers?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We actually had very high aspirations for using flyers and posting materials, distributing leaflets, putting things under people's doors as a way of organizing. And while I think that it is possible still to put a flyer under someone's door or to knock someone's door and safely, from a distance, have a conversation with them, in our experience, that has not been something that's been effective at bringing people into the organization or getting them to sign our petition. And so Sami can speak more to what he's been doing out in the parking lot and all the wonderful social observations of who goes out into the parking lot and what time people go out, how you can find different groups outside. I think starting with your social network, the people who you have in your phone already, or who's, you've seen and you're familiar with them, maybe the person right next door to you or other people on the floor together with you. Those are the first people who I would start with to knock their door or to call them or text them to start conversations with even if you are new to the building or have very, very few relationships, the people who you already have some kind of basis for starting a conversation with.
Yes, thank you everyone for sharing that. This is really is great. So basically, the way we started from the beginning for reaching the people is through our phone, our contacts, to look at the address you live in or the building you live in. If you know somebody who live in the same building or the building across the street from you, contact that person. Longer do you have his phone number, definitely you know him. So if you contact him, you don't answer, send him a message under the door. Let him contact you back. You need to start from there. And as you living in the building, you all the time getting out in that door, main door, in and out. It's like when you go into the work in the morning, you seeing the people, you saying hi, how you doing, good morning, but you never have a conversation with them. So if you spend the time outside, during the time the people coming back from work, or the time people going to work, if you spend a little time outside, to see the people, if they notice you and you notice them, you holler at them every day. So you can start from this. If you caught 1 to 2 people, you have a really serious conversation with them, which is all the time we use, a personal story. I shared my story with you before you share your story with me, because I'm the one who contacted you first. So if you open the door for me, having information, then I will tell you my plan. And then I'm going to ask you to do the same thing if you know somebody who you can talk to. So from one person to another, you're going to have a couple of people, in your board. And then at the time we start, doing the structure when we have more than 3 or 4 people. And then at the same time, while we're going outside, to have some fresh air or go some grocery or go, put some gas in your car, whoever you notice living in that complex or in that building, just we're all in the same boat. Feel, just go and trying to talk, as for right now, is the distance for conversation all the time is scary. If you try to talk to somebody, it's like, backing up. You back yourself up, introduce yourself, tell them who you are, right? and you want to have some 2 or 3 minutes conversation if they're available. So if they give you that 1 minute and 2 minutes, and that's your chance to make your story short, to make your plan short, and the message short, so they can get it at that moment. And then you ask them if they can exchange phone numbers or information. Then you can follow up with them later. So as you know, putting the message under the people door, next door to you, or the people in your phone, or the people you know in the area, so you'll be able to start from them to build up network around you. So if you build up 5 people from your phone or the people you know, so that 5 people, each one of them, you know, take a commitment to talk to another 2 to 3 to 5 people, just like what you did for yourself, you know. And if everybody take that commitment and make it happen in a short time, so you're gonna have some group is building up, and then the structure will start from that moment. So that's how we build our network, through friends, through the people we see at the morning while going to work, or the people we meet at 7-Eleven having coffee, or at the parking lot.
Thank you, Sami. That was very useful and very concrete about how actually you can do that when you don't have any common spaces in your building and you still need to reach your tenants. I really appreciate Sami and Sarah giving us concrete examples of how we can overcome these obstacles that I know many renters, especially in big cities, face. Our next speaker is somebody who is very experienced and also dedicated as an activist to organize some of the most marginalized communities in some of our biggest cities. And so it's my pleasure to welcome Uba Warsame Aden, who works as a medical interpreter at Swedish Hospital here in Seattle. She's a longtime East African community organizer. She's a fighter for affordable housing. And in fact, my office and Socialist Alternative has a long connection with her, especially through an incredible tenants' rights struggle that was successful called Stepping Forward, anti-stepping forward rather. Uba will talk about that. She's also been active for healthcare for all, and she's a full-time mom. Welcome, Uba.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me well?
Yes.
Great. So thank you so much, everyone. This is great. At this time we have new terminology in the medical world of COVID-19 era. It is crazy everywhere. Everybody is so scared. I was listening when Sami was saying that, contacting people and all of that. Now we have a different measures and different way of even contacting people. So everything is not how we used to mobilize ourselves. So it's like taking another step and thinking of mobilizing is another level now. We have to learn new normal of mobilizing people now because of what is happening within our world now. So, and this issue of speaking of the rent, suspending rent and mortgage, this is the perfect time with especially knowing that we have so many people who are not working and out of work. Like, for example, the community that I'm connected directly and which I can speak, personal stories from one to another that I hear about how rent, they can't pay the rent because I have a large group who are Uber drivers. I have a group of my network who are interpreters who work, as a contractors. They are all out of work. We have Lyft drivers who are also out of work. I have a brother of mine who was working in the airport. So their whole department shut off and they all were sent home. So the stories is like one after another. I mean, we can't even think. Sometimes I don't even know where we're going to be the next few months if we don't have some kind of plan for people in the way what are they going to do with their rent? So, and when some people thinking, okay, how are you going to suspend? We were talking and having those kind of conversations. Wall Street has been rescued. GM was rescued. They are big companies with multi-million dollars. We're talking about our working people. We don't need to be explaining why we cannot take care of our working people, why we cannot take care of mothers, fathers, and the children. We already have enough people who are homeless. Do we want it to bring more people to the homeless community? It's like my mind cannot even wrap around that when I think about it. I have a mother who contacted me and sent me a letter that her landlord sent it to her. She's actually someone who have Section 8 voucher. And I'm thinking, like, if a Section 8 is supposed to take care of this, and the husband is out of work because he was an Uber driver, why are they going to be worried about their rent? They need to take care of that automatically. So I'm thinking, like, okay, someone who has no voucher, someone who is not in subsidized housing, I get it, that was paying their rent. But someone who already have a system who's supposed to help them, and now they are in scarcity, and they cannot, they sleeping at night thinking that tomorrow will I lose my apartment with 6 children. And my background is, is psychology, and I'm thinking, like, what are we going to do when we have more people who are losing their mind because they are worried so much about how they're going to take care of their children? Then we're going to have to worry about how we're going to have more people in the psych ward because we created that. So this is not a small issue. This is not something to just reminisce about or talk about and just to say, oh, it's a possibility. This is something that has to take place, and it must take place. So I was saying, I don't need to really say much. All of you are on board. All of you understand the need of organizing. We still have to practice social distance because we wanted to all be healthy. Everybody, their health is number one priority. I was doing campaign and distributing a cloth mask on my own and delivering to people's house, or sometimes asking, stop by, drive through in front of my house, and I will have a bag, Ziploc bag, and I will throw in your window. I'm going to be distance, and we're still going to practice, the social distance and still provide this. So we need to make sure that our families are taken care of. And if our government and big companies are thinking that, yeah, the $1,200 freaking dollars is coming in, yeah, they can pay for. No, they can't pay for their bills, their electricity, their utilities, their other needs, and it's a one-time thing. Excuse me, $1,200 is not much. My rent is $2,500. So if I am out of work and I get $1,200, what is that going to do for me? Nothing. With 3 children, and I am one of the families who have the smallest amount of children with the communities that I am known in. So this issue, as I said, I'm so glad, Shama, you taking the initiative in this. This is needed now more than ever. This rent suspension and mortgage suspension has to take place. We need to reach out to everybody that we can reach out to. If we have to make a drive-through for people to distribute masks, which is a hit thing. I found out that I've distributed 300 masks in like 4 days. And, we collect the money and we paid for it and bought it from women who can sew this. So if we can do that, maybe we can have flyers and have people drive by and just take the flyer and let them know that this is the initiative we taken and this is something that's important. And if we have to have people who can sign in, then we need to do that. We need to get as many signatures as we need to. We need to make sure that people know about this. We need to make sure that we are all taking part. Everybody can do something about this. We all are responsible and we all have a stake in this, every single one of us.
Thank you so much, Uba. That was really, perfect pitch to inspire people as to why they should organize. As you said, Uba, correctly, the big corporations are getting bailed out, but the workers, the employees of that corporation are not getting bailed out. I mean, you mentioned GM, Boeing is another example. Boeing executives are getting billions of dollars in bailouts. They already had corporate tax handouts from the state government, including from the Democratic establishment, but their mechanics have run out of paid leave. And now Boeing has announced and made a dreadful announcement, actually, that their mechanics are going to go back to, are going to be called back to work next week, which is, I mean, from a health, I'm not a doctor or a public health expert, but from everything that we are hearing from public health scientists, that seems like a disastrous decision and we have to push back against it. And the last time they tried to do it, there was a massive community outrage against it and we were able to win And I think we need a part 2 of that community outrage to make sure that Boeing does not put their own workers and the Boeing mechanics, the machinists, and the entire community at risk. And the whole theme of tonight's event is renters and working people fighting back. So you might ask at some point, does it even make a difference to fight back? Why should we fight back? Does it work? Or isn't it going to put us at risk? Well, we just received one more concrete confirmation live right now in the news that organizing and fighting back actually works. And when we get organized and fight back, we can win. Along with rent suspension in our Seattle and Washington state petition, which I hope my staff will share with you now, because if you haven't signed that petition, you should sign it. But in that petition, we are demanding a rent, mortgage, and utility suspension, meaning you shouldn't have to pay rent or your mortgage or your utility, and there shouldn't be any consequences in the future. But along with that, we are also calling for a rent freeze, meaning no increases in rent. And the reason we included that was because, stunningly, but not surprisingly, we were hearing from tenants of corporate landlords that their landlords were sending them notices of rent increases in the middle of this pandemic, when people are losing their loved ones and so much tragedy has unfolded. That's the viciousness with which corporate landlords operate. These property management corporations operate. And we're not talking about the small, single family landlords. We're talking about these big corporations. And so that's why we call for a rent freeze as well. And do you know what we just heard? We just heard from it's just been reported in the Seattle Times that the governor has finally announced that there will be a rent freeze on increases of residential rents. So rent freeze meaning no increases in rents. This is the announcement from the governor. It is a victory for our movement, because we fought for this and we have won this. It didn't come out of the largest of the establishment. Part of this organizing was all of you, over 9,000 people who signed this petition. And if you haven't signed it, you should sign it, because organizing works. But of course, let's be sober. To win rent suspension, it is not going to be enough to just sign petitions. Signing petitions is just step number 1. So all the points that Sasha, Sarah, Sami, Uba, Rob, all of our speakers have shared with us from around the country, including in Seattle, those are the important points to take home, that it is the painstaking day-to-day tenant organizing that is going to work. And those of you who are tenants and also union members, you should take the inspiring example of Unite Here and contact your union and see if they will get involved in this fight as well. And I think some of what I just said also in terms of the victory we have just won, which I hope has truly inspired everybody. It's a real example of what we can win when we fight. It goes into some of the questions that some of you have asked. One of the questions is, my rent was raised by almost 40% in February. I mean, this is just unconscionable. And when we asked if they would lower back to its prior amount, they suggested we work for Amazon, Instacart, or Costco. I mean, this is just stunning. Thank you, fellow tenant, whoever has shared this question. Thank you for sharing this question. I mean, the comment, it's not a question, but a comment. I'll just read it again because it's so stunning and shows the nature of capitalism. My rent was increased by almost 40% in February. This is when the coronavirus pandemic had already begun. And when we asked if they would lower back it to its prior amount, they suggested we work for Amazon, Instacart, or Costco. In other words, they want us to get exploited as workers, expose ourselves to the sickness so that we can pay them the rent so that they can keep making profits. And this is money, as Rob said, they don't need. Another question, another point, another comment said they're raising our rent by $200, and that is before the new parking fees and storage fees. So that is why we are calling for a rent freeze, and we have won that. But it's a temporary rent freeze. We have to keep fighting. I believe it runs only till June 4th, but we are going to need a freeze on rent increases and for much longer than that. So our petition is calling for a rent freeze, meaning no rent increases through 2020. That's going to be a very example. There's another question that I wonder if one of our speakers would address. The question is, would be helpful if you gave steps like how to find our landlords other properties and how to get small landlords on our side, as the biggest issue is corporations and banks. I think some of it has been answered, but I wonder Sasha, if you wanted to, start a response to this, and maybe we can see if Rob or Sarah or Sami also wanted to join in.
Yeah, could you repeat that question? Sorry.
Yes, of course. The question is, would be helpful if you gave us steps like how to find our landlords other properties. And the second question is how to get small landlords on our side.
Yeah, on the small landlords, yeah, to win this, we're going to need to unite working people, homeowners, renters, small landlords, and small business. So, small businesses, they also face high rent from their corporate landlords and rent increases, and small businesses are being pushed out of the city, particularly ones owned by people of color, immigrants, and women. And I think we also, with small landlords, that is why we're also fighting for a suspension of mortgage payments, that small landlords, should not be, people who are just struggling by off of renting one unit or whatever should not be, foreclosed upon or anything like that, while still fighting for our right to be able to, stay housed through this crisis. I actually, when I was phone banking people to invite them to this town hall, I talked with one small landlord who he rents out one house, and he said that he has already told his tenants just not to pay rent in May. So there's definitely landlords out there who can be won to our side. And yeah, we're gonna need to continue to fight for rent freeze and suspension. If you haven't signed the petition yet, please do, especially if you live in the state of Washington. The governor, he's a Democratic establishment. He could do this if he wants to, but he's not going to do it unless we continue to keep building our movement. The political establishment is and has been beholden to the corporate real estate developers and their lobbyists, who they get tons of campaign donations from them. And this is how we've won everything that we've won so far. The eviction moratorium, we got 9,000. No, wait, we got I think like 7,000 signatures on our petition for eviction moratorium, and that's when the mayor enacted it. So the petition's the beginning. The fighting for a rent suspension is a bigger demand, and so it's going to take this bigger organizing of a rent strike. And maybe someone else can come in about finding the other units that are owned by your landlord.
Rob, did you want to add to this?
Well, yeah, just on it is a struggle to find out all the buildings owned by the existing landlord. We used to spend hours and hours down at City Hall, where you can go through the database and you can find the landlord's records, and you can find out what other properties they own. But in what ended up helping us actually, and this is really key in citywide organizing drives and the rest of it, is that we connected with a real estate agent who was left-wing and sympathetic, and she would just, anytime we sent her a landlord's name, she would just send us all the information that real estate brokers and the rest of it have access. And that what we found was in the tenant meetings, and what we continue to find is when tenants do manage to get together, either through Zoom or other means of organizing in this current situation, is that their confidence goes up. They don't feel as isolated. This is a moment when people are feeling super isolated. And I think coming together and hearing, and it's the same with union organizing drives, as some of the previous speakers will be aware of, when you get people together, they begin to share the stories of struggle and stories of hardship. And also they have that healthy anger towards how they've been treated and how they've been mistreated, both as tenants and as workers. So I think that getting together is very important, and it will actually, once you can get people together, then it can begin to snowball for us. But finding out that your landlord owns another 50 or 100 or 200 units has always been helpful for us, because a lot of tenants will just say, oh my God, they are so rich. We had that here just recently with a group of houses that are under the name Happy Homes. And people were stunned at how many buildings their landlord owns, and that their rent is just going to enrich, and a couple actually in this situation.
Thank you, Rob. And in fact, just to add to what Sasha and Rob were saying, if you all look at the FAQ that we have shared on pages 3 and 4, we have concrete points on how to organize, and this is part of that sort of guidelines. How do you find out who your fellow tenants are? And part of finding that out is also to finding out if your landlord owns other properties. And before I go into that in a little bit, I wanted to first thank the Alexandria organizers, Sarah and Sami, and also the Philadelphia Tenants Union, because a lot of what you see in that in that particular section on pages 3 and 4 of the FAQ is from, it's gleaned from the insights we have gained from the Philadelphia Tenants organizing, and also from the struggle in Alexandria, Virginia, like actual concrete day-to-day things that they have done, without which we won't succeed. And so, as Rob was saying, finding out if your landlord is a big property management corporation who owns building in the neighborhood or city is very important, as Sasha was also pointing out. And you can do this. If you don't know already, then you can do this from a property record search online. We've done that. I just wanted to give you an example from today. We got an email today from one of our constituents who said, I'm a Capitol Hill resident. Capitol Hill is a neighborhood in Seattle in District 3, for those of you who are from outside Seattle. I'm writing to let you know I support your efforts to suspend rent during the COVID-19 crisis. For the past month, I have emailed and talked with the property manager about helping residents by forgiving rent or at least paying the building utilities. All requests have been met with a no. I have been in touch with the owners of the property, Hamilton Urban Investors, but so far they haven't responded. What more can I do as a tenant? I'm still employed, but my significant other is not, and I'm taking on some of his financial burdens. We need rent suspensions before May rents are due. So obviously the larger component of this is for this tenant who wrote to us to start getting organized with other tenants in the building, immediate neighbors, with all the tips that we heard from our speakers. But in addition to that, my staff did a quick property record search this morning after we got this email, and we found out that their building is owned by this company, Hamilton Urban Partners LLC, which is a real estate investment firm that openly boasts on their webpage of, quote, delivering attractive returns to its investors, unquote. Delivering attractive returns to investors is code for we are gouging and exploiting the tenants and sucking their blood so that we can make profits. That's what it actually means. We better understand that and wise up so that we fight for our rights. And in fact, we also found that the property manager there is Redside Partners, which is a big property management firm in the area. So, this is a concrete example of how many of us can find out who these landlords are. And I think Rob made a very important point that it helps educate our fellow tenants also when we help them understand that your landlord is not a small, starving mom and pop landlord. This is a big corporation with millionaire executives. I wanted to direct one other question to Sarah, and then maybe Rob can also weigh in. Sarah, we are hearing from a lot of reporters, ever since we announced this town hall, reporters are asking us, aren't renters going to be vulnerable to eviction if they engage in a rent strike? Isn't it irresponsible and reckless of renters or organizations to call for a rent strike? How would you respond to
that? Thank you for that question. I mean, Rob's data point of April rent, where a third of renters in America were not able to pay their rent, I think reflects actually that's the risk that people are really facing right now. And so the risk is facing that alone. So what we're talking about tonight is organizing together in your building and across a city or across a state in a way that you are not alone to face this crisis, today, this month, next month, the whatever month it is that we're able to return to work. I think that the networks that we're building now in the buildings, I believe are going to be important for, we don't know how long, but for quite some time to come. And so, today the things that we're gathering together around are about rent. But Sammy and his his neighbors were immediately talking about safety. There are people, other of our members of the union, who are in buildings without access to Wi-Fi, and so their kids who are at home are not able to complete school assignments. And so, in other places, people are thinking about how do we organize to get high-speed Wi-Fi access in our building so that our kids can have the same sort of access to academic, an online classroom that people whose families can afford to pay on their own. So I think the risk is that we face things alone. We face difficult times alone. And so I would encourage, people to continue to reach out to find what you have in common so that you have a group of people who are standing with you.
Thank you, Sarah. Rob, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think Sarah hit the nail on the head, but people are feeling very vulnerable about the situation, but are we making life more vulnerable for people by helping them organize? Our key thing is we're not asking everybody to get in a fight and with their landlord. We're asking people, we're presuming that there's going to be large numbers of people that are going to be unable to pay the rent, and we want to try to help them to the degree that we can to organize so that it's actually it's the opposite, so that people are less likely to get evicted if they are organized. So that's the key element for us. And I think that we live in a society where the establishment always tells us, don't rock the boat, it will cost you. So don't fight for civil rights. Don't fight if you're a woman for the right to vote. Don't fight, it's always better to try to come to some private, singular agreement with your employer rather than to collectively work together. And we're fighting for people to be organized for what is, to argue for a rent strike 6 months ago would have been reckless. To argue for a rent strike today is in tune with the reality of the new world that we're entering into. And the whole feeling and the spirit of the Rent Strike 2020 is to organize. And organizing is all we have. We don't have billions in the bank, but we do have people, and and organizing together is the only choice we have, really.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Rob, for clarifying that. And I think I'm definitely really inspired to take the next steps. I hope you all are. Sasha is going to run through some of the next steps quickly. But before that, I wanted to just re-announce, if those of you who came in late, maybe on the live stream, one of the most exciting things we're trying to organize for, and as Rob and Sarah and Sammy and Sasha and Uba all explained, organizing is absolutely crucial. It's the backbone of how we can win any kind of social and economic justice in this deeply unequal society that doesn't work for us. And so one of the most exciting steps we are hoping to build towards is a May 1st strike action, rent strike, and also workplace strike actions are going to happen throughout the nation. And in Seattle, we're going to have a car caravan protest action. Details are going to be announced. But I would really ask one thing of everybody who's watching on the live stream. If you are excited by everything that you've heard from the speakers, if you are looking forward to fight, it's going to be hard. But as Rob said, it's going to be even harder if we don't fight back. If we don't fight back, we're going to see a massive wave of evictions and foreclosures. And the only hope we have is to fight against that. If you're excited by that prospect of building solidarity and by the idea of having a car caravan protest on May 1st, would you just say on the feed that you're excited about May 1st car caravan protest or something like that, so that we know that you are excited. We get that feedback, and then we will use that as our own fuel to keep organizing. And having said that, now I wanted to turn to Sasha, who will go over some of the most important next steps that are coming up for the Seattle area. And for those of you who are not in Seattle, please keep in touch with our office, and we will help you get hooked up with organizers in your own cities, in your own regions, because this is really a nationwide movement. Sasha.
Hi, yeah, so this was really great, but we want to continue building out of this meeting. So the next event that everyone should come out to is the April, you're seeing it? Oh, well, okay, well, the next one is there we go, the April 22nd City Council meeting to discuss the tax Amazon legislation to fund emergency COVID-19 relief. We're in this meeting, we've been talking about fighting for rent suspension and mortgage suspension and a rent freeze, but we need more than that. The relief funds that the federal government is giving, a one-time payment is not enough. This tax would fund $500 a month to 100,000 households in Seattle. And we're going to be doing that through taxing the most profitable corporations who have been enjoying Washington State as a tax haven for decades. So we're going to be meeting up at 9 a.m. Before the 10 a.m. meeting to collectively talk, and then people can join the city council meeting and go into public comment. We need as many people as possible telling the city council to vote in favor of this legislation. The next event after that is going to be April 25th at 2 p.m. This is going to be our follow-up meeting on the rent strike, because you're going to go out there, take the tools and the organizing tactics that we talked about today, organize your neighbors, and then come back a little bit before May 1st to discuss what challenges we're facing, how can we build this even bigger, and our the upcoming plans for May 1st. And then finally, of course, May 1st, the day of our rent strike, we want to make this as big as possible, be as public and loud as possible while still observing social distancing. So you can find links to all three of those events on the Councilmember Shama Sawant Facebook page. Yeah, let's do it. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Sasha. And again, let me repeat, if you're excited about our next steps, especially the May 1st car caravan protest, please post on the live stream, because then we'll know that you are excited, and that will help us continue our work as well. And we're going to be closing for tonight, but I really urge you all to be in touch with me and my office and our organizers, because this is incredible, from Seattle to Oakland to Alexandria, Virginia. I mean, this is incredible. This is a nationwide movement that has been represented in tonight's online phone meeting. And it shows the breadth of the movement, but it also is a reflection of the depth of the crisis, as our speakers have explained. And so if we want to not, go towards the bottom and really, make sure we fight for our communities and our fellow workers and our fellow tenants, the most marginalized, then we have to seriously get organized. But to make sure that we don't feel demoralized, we don't feel isolated, because it's so difficult, especially in the days of social distancing. Don't forget the most exciting announcement that we made tonight, which is that we have just won a rent freeze through Washington State, meaning no rent increases through June 4th. So if your landlord sends you a notice for rent increase, make sure to let us know, and make sure that we, draft a response to your landlord saying this is against the law, because the governor just announced this. And make no mistake, this is absolutely a result of grassroots organizing. This is this is not a largesse from the establishment, because the establishment is beholden to corporate interests, but they are forced, the political establishment is forced to do what people are demanding if many of us are calling for those demands and, collectively organize. The other thing I wanted to share before we close for tonight is, just the question of who else is calling for a rent suspension and rent strike. It's not just us. It's happening throughout the nation. We are in really good company. Rent Strike 2020 and countless housing justice and tenants' rights organizations have called for the same thing we are calling for here: suspension of rent, mortgage, and utility payments, and for the rent freeze. And people like Sami, tenants like Sami and Uba, they are among the frontline leaders in their communities who have really helped organize the tenants of the Chateau apartments, the struggle that Sasha was talking about. Many of these are just ordinary people who have incredible courage, and they're able to defeat corporate landlords because they know how to fight, and they know how to bring others along with them. And so in addition to socialists and housing justice activists, we even have groups like Parents Together, which is a national parent-led group that is calling on US Congress to suspend rent, mortgage, and utility payments. And there's a number of tenants' rights organizations. I just want to read them very quickly. Kent Tenants Union in Kent, Ohio. Autonomous Tenants Union in Chicago, Illinois. Tenants United in Chicago, Illinois. Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment in Los Angeles. Rent Strike ATX in Austin, Texas. Woodside on the Move, Queens, New York. 1234 Pacific Street Tenants Association, Brooklyn, New York. Unite Here Local 23, African Communities Together, which is what we heard from Sami and Sarah in Alexandria, Virginia. Richmond Tenants Union in Richmond, Virginia. Tenants of Saturn Property Management, linking up with LA Tenants Union in Los Angeles, California. These are just some examples of people who are on our side. We have a lot of people on our side. We just have to get rid of our demoralization, our feelings of isolation, and recognize that if we organize seriously, we can win. We have just shown that when we fight, we can win. So let's take that feeling with us for the rest of the days, before we come back on the 22nd. For those of you who are in the Seattle area, let's make sure we also build our movement to tax Amazon and big business, because we need to fund coronavirus relief for our most vulnerable families. We need to fund affordable social housing that goes hand in hand with fighting for rent suspension. I really thank everybody who joined us tonight. Keep in touch with us. Make sure you're signing up to our Facebook group, the Seattle Rent Strike 2020 Facebook group. We'll share that once again. And contact my office anytime you have any question or concern. We'll share the email address again. And looking forward to seeing you all again. Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.